All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Express Technical Committee meeting for June 15th. We have with us here myself, Douglas, Blake, Hage, and Linus. And I'm sure there might be other people joining, but for now, this is our starting people. We have a few agenda items. Besides any ad hoc ones we add at the end, right, we are going to go over the Express 4.14 release. We're going to go over just some thoughts on a comment I know that was made by, I think, someone who does Angular stuff about TypeScript in Express. I wanted to touch on Nodejs O8 support, and that's not specific to Express, but the Express TC does kind of go over a few orgs that has a whole bunch of modules that support Express, and a lot of them currently do support Nodejs O8, and we might extend that into maybe talk about Nodejs O10 and stuff too. And then the last item is talking about maybe a better, more centralized way to do some coordination. So example, like central generic issue tracking, for example, like what modifications just need to go on, like documentation improvements and other just different things like that, because of the fact that we go over several orgs. Now, so we'll see what we find out there. All right, so for topic number one, that's the Express.js 4.14 release. So this has been in works for, actually, I just saw, I think the pull request that I had made actually says 20-some days. So it has certainly been pushed back a little bit. Now, there are a couple various reasons for that. Not some of them bandwidth related, but others just some issues that were reported, and we just wanted to get hammered out. In addition, this is going to be our first actual release as the Express.js Technical Committee underneath the Nodejs Foundation, so that's a pretty cool milestone as well. And even before that, since we only started rolling the release last month, and so the actual last release was, I think, in January or February, and even then, the current minor point release 4.13 was actually released over 1 year ago. So that all of that kind of contributed to why it took so long to kind of get it all rolled up. There's just a lot of things to go over. Also, and we'll be improving this, as we go on here and work on it, and that's what actually one of our last topics are on. One of the reasons it delayed, I'm just kind of going over this for everybody, for you here and everybody listening, is that Express is, for various reasons, it's split up into lots of different modules. Some of those reasons are actually to just not only make Express more focused on each different modules, focusing on different things, but also in general actually helps us share code base with things like, for example, Koa.js does share a bunch of our code base, and that's made possible by splitting it up into modules rather than just one big clump of one giant module published to NPM. And because of that, and because various things like there isn't tons of bandwidth to just maintain many different lines of all of these different modules, is that they tend to still work lockstep with Express releases. So, like, for example, until it's known that another minor of Express is going to release, a lot of them hold, and this is just, what I've been doing, not that it has to continue this way, but just I used to hold off minor releases of all of those things in order to line them up with Express's minor, because that way we don't have stuff where we have to fix a bug in a subdependency and it is 3 deep down and it and it's one above it both updated or minors, and either that means we have to do a patch there, patch that, patch the one above it, and then Express still can't use that patch because it's on the previous minor, and then Express will have to minor up, or we have to release, backport the fix to a previous minor, manage that twice, and then go up to Express. So, that could certainly be a possibility in the future, especially if we, potentially if we get more bandwidth, and it's really almost like if it's that useful. So the point is that it was unknown at the time when there would be a minor, and one thought I just had here, and a lot of this we'll discuss here a little bit, and I'll make discussions for any of these that we think we need to go deeper on, is even the potential to, say, more regularly schedule Express target minors, as in saying, like, well, every 3 months let's have a minor version of Express, as in, make it more of a cycle rather than an as needed. So that's always certainly a possibility, because then these modules can better figure out, well, it's only like less than a month away from when Express would minor up anyway, so we'll go ahead and minor up, and hopefully there isn't some crazy critical bug that happens within that time period. It could be, but it's just reduced, so I mean, those are all possible things. But there is a pull request in the Express repo for release 4.14. It is complete. I just wrapped up the last thing earlier today. The intention is that we publish it probably sometime tomorrow, or for those in times of just waking up today. That way it gives us time to let it sit there for a little bit, let us kind of look it over and have the opportunity to have anybody who's listening here can quickly go and grab it down, but also that way myself will be awake for quite a long time after it's released to respond to any issues, and then as the night rolls over, those like Yappa will be awake as well. So that gives us a nice long stretch of stuff to respond to. Typically there isn't too much and shouldn't be a big problem, but whatever. So yeah, we went over what was in the Express last chat. So I mean, if you are listening in, feel free to check that, listen in on our last conversation, or go check out the pull request, which has a tiers checklist at the top. So I won't necessarily go into all that again. I will go in that there was one addition to it, which was the first checkbox in it, which was encode URL in res.location/res.redirect if not already encoded. This actually was reported, I think, twice. At first it was kind of like, if we wanted to fix it, but some stuff was discussed within Nodejs technical committee itself and decided it's probably for the better. So, because with recent versions of Nodejs, res.setHeader will throw if you give it bad characters, and none of those characters make sense in a URL. So what we will do is, if you give a URL to res.redirect or res.location, res.redirect being the more likely one, we will make sure Express, starting with 4.14, will ensure that it actually contains only valid URL characters, and it will not throw to do this. It will encode anything that's not already encoded. So, for example, if you give it a URL that contains a raw snowman character, for example, it will encode that Unicode code point into UTF-8 by default, and then put that in there as percent encoded form in 3 bytes, or 3 octets, percent encoded. Now, some people, and there are legitimate reasons, plenty of times, where you may be redirecting to a website that does not do UTF-8 in its URLs, because it wasn't until 2005 or so that was actually became a something actually stated out on the web that you should use UTF-8 in the URLs. So there are legacy sites that don't. Well, what we are not doing is we are not just encoding. So we are only encoding things that are not URL characters into UTF-8, your percent encoded sequences. So if you give it a URL that's a valid URL, including like things like saying you have percent encoded stuff in there, we will not touch it. So you are absolutely welcome to send to sites that say use Shift.js, Big5, whatever it is. Just pass in an already encoded string, and we will not touch it. So it is not to pass in unencoded stuff. You are still expected to encode it, but we will just ensure that it is completely encoded, whatever you pass in. So therefore, res.location and res.redirect should no longer ever cause a throw to occur, which is kind of nice. So you can always be ensured that you will get redirected there, no matter what characters happen to be in there in case you forget to encode something. But that is pretty much the only additional change from the last time that we spoke. So yeah, now I guess real quick here, I will open it up for the three of you here. If you have any comments or just wanted to talk about something, maybe if you guys want to, I propose that we probably do it tomorrow sometime. If you think that maybe we make more time or less time, feel free to chime in or not.
The release tomorrow sounds good to me.
Yeah, I agree. Sounds good.
Yeah, and that's actually, I forgot, Yapa, that you actually went ahead and there was a discussion that actually myself and he had between these meetings, just as a check-in, and we thought about putting a section on the website to have a more friendly changelog, as in our changelog that's in Express, the history file, is a very technical changelog, very tierce. So the idea was to maybe put that on the website in some way. If you want to talk about that, Yapa.
Yeah, right. So there's going to be a new menu on Express.js.com called Changelogs. So when you click on it, you will get a list of changelogs for starting from the 4x releases, starting from 4.14 actually, and it is a list of changes that were made in the release, and it's focused primarily on the relevance to the developers instead of some of the changes which might be a little bit of like a noise, which is the state in the regular changelog. So we'll be doing it for all the releases.
Yeah,
and if you want to take a look at it right now, there's open pull request on Express.js.com called Express 4.14 updates. So if you look at it, the files changed, you will have an idea of what's coming up.
Yep, and the kind of idea about it too, being on the Express website, is not only I feel like it's a little more discoverable, but it's also kind of like, I feel like a good in-between of having it in the repo and having it on a wiki. So the Express.js website, anybody can make a pull request to, and we'll certainly want to incorporate it and change it over time as people have suggestions. And the putting it on the website helps us a lot with that, makes it a lot more discoverable. So especially if we have releases that maybe you need to know something a little more. Maybe we want to tell you about how do you know if you're affected by this thing or whatever. That gives us like a good room to put that information, and also just a nice way for people to kind of like even make pull requests against and change. And we want it to be a good like description someone would read and understand a lot about it. So maybe a change. It's certainly possible a change might even require a whole paragraph to talk about. Unlike the changelog, which is just a plain old tiered list, which works for certain people, but I'm sure there are a lot of people it doesn't work for and would like to know more information. So hopefully maybe this will be that kind of a place, kind of feeling this out. Yeah, cool. So, yep, so I think that's mostly it. There's in Express.4.14, just for anybody listening in, there isn't too much like super new, right? So it's not like there's a whole bunch of amazing APIs that just randomly are here. There are certainly just things tweaked, things iterated on, and things like that. So good examples of iterated and tweaks is like now res.send file, you can tell it to not acknowledge range headers. So you can turn off range handling there. You can just tell it, if you send a file, just send the full file every time, right? Maybe that's what you need. Because before it would listen and look, if the request had a range header, it would send only that portion of the file. So now you can turn that off or on if you want to. You can turn off the cache. You can completely turn off the cache control header in send file, and that also applies for the static middleware as well. You can, for example, when there's a I don't know how well used, but there's a rec.ranges or rec.range, I think it is, that now has a new options second argument, and that you can give it an argument like combine ranges that are combinable. So if you're using that to serve up, portions of your API, you can now reduce overlapped ranges and adjacent ranges into one larger range. And that's all according to the spec, and actually that was a community contribution, and we've exposed that through there. So those are kind of like, if you're looking for kind of like what's in there, various performance improvements. I mean, that's pretty much the theme of it, just some, minor iterations, some new knobs to turn, I guess, and some various performance improvements. And we'll make, of course, a announcement with all the stuff that's in there, hopefully on the website, our new changes section. And I talked to Yap a little bit about this, is that on the Express website they actually added this notification thing. Things like a little bullhorn symbol. Is that right?
Yep.
Yep. And so what we'll do is when we release it, we'll utilize that to kind of like signal when people go to express.js.com, hey, there's a recent release, because obviously we won't know if it's new to that person, but figure at least just if it's fairly recent, at least for minors especially, like we'll just have it up there. So that way people are kind of like drawn to it. I know that a lot of people use npm outdated. That will of course tell you about it. So cool. I mean, I think that's pretty much all I really have about the 4.14 release myself. Cool. So I guess we'll touch on the next one, is the TypeScript. So there was an issue, and I know Blake is probably familiar with it, that there has been, requests every so often about adding Typescript definition file or whatever for Express's API. So people who do use TypeScript can take advantage of either checking that their types are right, and or some editors have a lot more improved autocomplete and suggestions if you have TypeScript definitions, I've noticed, than just JS docs alone, because they can better understand what a variable actually has access to. And the proposal so far has always been to just go ahead and let's figure out and create some TypeScript definition files. And I think that there's this is fairly new. I think correct me if I'm wrong, Blake, but there's a way to add that to the package.json file to signal to everything that, hey, there's the definition file here. None of this was ever really to change Express into TypeScript or anything like that. Just make these essentially files, just like we kind of like manage JS docs on there already. It's kind of like side by side. It doesn't like require us to change the language or anything. But one there was a user who did post on there, and I didn't want to be, the only person who made the decision, so I just wanted to bring it up, just to get your opinions on it. He offered to rewrite Express, and I assume it's just the one Express repo, not all of its dependencies, into TypeScript. I initially said not really interested, and then he made another comment, so that's what made me think maybe I should just bring it up just in case to see with everybody. I don't know, you may or may not have seen my response, but I'd like to hear your responses or what your opinions are. Just real quick, mine was that not super interested in making it TypeScript because I didn't think that rewriting it all in TypeScript was really a requirement for TypeScript definitions. Sure, it would auto-generate them, but in the end, certainly, not that big of a deal. And in addition, of course, not only would technically we probably have to know TypeScript, sure, it's just like, I'm sure people will say TypeScript is very similar to JavaScript. It's exactly the same thing I heard a million times with CoffeeScript too. They might be similar, but they do have differences. Plus, it's compiled, and in the end, I feel like a lot of our audience, there's a lot of people who are familiar with JavaScript, and they come into Express and look at it. Certainly, having it TypeScript may or may not, be a little weird for them. That's also why I've kind of kept semicolons in there for now. I know we talked about standard last time, but I think we decided that in the end, we'll probably just use standard on there. But because I know a lot of people do scrutinize the source code just as learning. So that was why I was kind of not too much, but I understand the benefits of TypeScript. I've dabbled in a little bit, but haven't used it extensively, but certainly understand that it could have benefits, and I guess I'll open the floor up to you three, however you want to go. If Blake wants to go first, it looks like he unmuted.
I have plenty of thoughts on it, so it's all good. I don't think we should write it in TypeScript for the, especially for the 5.x release, just because there's a couple of big reasons, but the module system doesn't really help us. We would have to switch to ES6 imports, or we'd have to use a hacky-looking TypeScript export, and I don't think we should even start to adopt ES6 style imports and exports, just because, like you said, a lot of people use this. It would break, if we actually went to ES6 exports, it would break everyone that uses Express today. And then it also breaks the documentation and everything else. Maybe for a 6.0, we could reconsider it. But yeah, for this one, I don't think it's worth it. We should definitely add definitions though, and it is on my roadmap to actually write the definitions for that. The other thing is that all dependencies would need to have TypeScript definitions anyway, so anything we import into Express would need to have a definition. So if the proposal is to rewrite it in TypeScript, it means also dependencies that are not currently TypeScript and used by Express would need to go to TypeScript. So it's kind of a big change.
Good to know. So I did not know that last part is a good point. Obviously, I'm sure they don't. There's probably situations where they don't have to have it directly, but we would at least have to maintain a TypeScript definition for our dependencies within our repo, just so it knew what we would expect. So I think that's a pretty good point. And yeah, as far as, I certainly wouldn't say let's do it in Express 4, that's for sure. It certainly has already existing user base. It would certainly be for only consideration in another major. And yeah, I mean, even then, saying that Express 5 probably not too much at this point could make sense too. So that may make sense, Blake. Cool. Yappa or Linus, I don't know if either one want to go next or have any thoughts.
Yeah, I think rewriting in TypeScript is less of a problem. I think the bigger problem would be maintenance.
Right. Yeah, because basically what you're saying is I'm sure even if it was contributed, sure it's easy to get it in a TypeScript in the first place, but then at that point probably whoever contributed is probably not going to now say I'm now maintaining Express. So essentially, it would then fall back onto us who have varying degrees of experience with it to go back to maintaining it. And you know, that was also one of my concerns as well, because you know, it's a hard balance, right? It's like a drive-by contribution, right? It's what they all are. You know, people contribute, especially when it's a new feature or something like this. It may be really good, may not be. I mean, it all does incur some cost to the people who currently maintain it, you know, ourselves or whatever, just because there are a lot of the people, not everybody who contributes, but I would say pretty much a lot of the people are just there to contribute their feature and move on. So then it does come back onto us to continue the maintenance of it. So it's a good point. Cool. Linus, do you have any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I agree with what's been said. I think it's not worth it at the moment, but maybe in the future, especially with the imports having to change, I think that will just be. I think we should at least wait.
All right. Cool. Sounds like at least we're all basically the people who are here right now in agreement. It's basically like, yeah, probably definitely not at least now. Maybe not never, but probably doesn't make sense at this point in time. Cool. All right. Well, I guess we'll just roll into the next topic. Should be a fairly quick one as well, which is Nodejs O.8 support in the orgs. So this issue is that, so through the various orgs, so just as a primer for everybody, just also listening in too, is that the Express TC ourselves actually cover 3 GitHub organizations. That's Express.js, Pillar.js, and JS HTTP. Now, there are 3 organizations just because there are a bunch of modules, and it kind of helps us have a little bit of separation instead of one big pile of stuff. They all depend on each other. Essentially, if you go top down, it's Express depends on, you know, Express.js org stuff depends on usually Pillar.js org stuff, which depends on JS HTTP org stuff. So that's kind of like the 3 layers there. High level to low level things. Other things like Koa and things like that will usually come in at the Pillar.js or lower level to share our dependencies. So a lot of these dependencies, especially JS HTTP dependencies, actually support Nodejs O.8. In fact, pretty much almost every single thing except for Express and a few hodgepodge here and there all support down Nodejs O.8. JS HTTP is an exception in that most of its stuff actually goes all the way down to Nodejs O.6. Now, at the time a lot of these were made was probably like before even io.js was even a thing, right? So at the time you had Node.js O.11 was like the highest, then they rushed out O.12, you know, and there was a pretty significant base. There was a bunch of Linux distros that had adopted Node.js into their thing and actually came pre-installed with O.6, so that was super annoying for module people. Because everybody would complain if it didn't work on there. So the point here is that, sure, right, supporting a version like has 2 incurred costs, I would say. One is that sometimes they might have to have branched code, as in you say, doesn't have this feature, use this old way, otherwise use this new way, right? So branch code, that's semi-okay. Not too bad, I guess, but the second part to that, that's I think the most annoying part, and I think where this issue came up from, was testing. So like testing on Travis CI. So Travis CI will let you do on O.6 and O.8 and blah, 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 blah. The problem is that, and you know, I'm not going to necessarily like impose philosophy on everything, but I mean, our testing harness that we use, thankfully, after I brought it up with them, they dutifully, at least for this major, the 2.x series, will support O.8. So all our O.6 stuff actually has to use 1.x of Mocha. Can't go up above that. O.8 stuff can't go above probably 2.x of Mocha, though there's nothing higher right now. But even then, it's a hodgepodge of things. For example, we no longer can we upgrade supertest past, I think, 1.10 or whatever in O.8 crap, because they use a caret in there and the default npm that comes with it. And I know we can in our travis.ci put a detection and then install, I think, like 128,000 is the version number of npm that was like a special backport of npm from O.10 to O.8 back a while ago, and it never got accepted, blah, blah, blah. That just increases like annoyance, and we can do that if that's a problem. But still, like, it's just these days, and I think Jonathan, who's not here with us today, at least as a participant here, pulled up a spreadsheet in the discussions thread about this that showed, I think that's probably the Node.js versions that are accessing NPM. You'll notice O.8 is missing, and I think that's not because they didn't collect the stats. I believe it's because they actually didn't add the header until sometime in O.10 timeline to actually report to the NPM registry what version of Node was actually interacting with it. So it's missing O.6 and O.8, so we can't really see that. But I did see, and it does still show people using O.10. I mean, personally, I still encounter O.10 all the damn time. Hopefully that's actually getting better, and in fact, I saw a really promising trend there that can help like us, and so I saw that a big shift of a percentage was over this year itself was moving away from O.10 and spreading between 4 and 6, which is actually pretty good. That shows like there's a nice shift there. Notably, it's skipping O.12, which makes sense because I mean personally I skip O.12, and I know that there is a proposal for Express 5 where I said I'm not even going to sit. If we drop O.10 from Express 5, we're just going to skip over O.12 and just go right to 4, because I think that's pretty much where the main usages have been going anyways. So I know I haven't let you guys talk just yet, but I'm just kind of going over the little history here. But so the idea was drop O.8. I think that pretty much everybody is in agreement, unless you guys think otherwise, that we should probably just start making them dropping O.8, probably make the minimum versions O.10. And of course, I don't want to do this without a major bump on the modules anyways, and actually pretty much a lot of them are all ready for a major. They were all held back on their current majors because of Express 3.x, which has been long gone. It's a good window for our majors to bump up to something, which would give us a nice window there. But I did want to kind of like pass by with you guys not only just the O.8 stuff, which I'm in agreement to get rid of whenever a module bumps its major, but also the thought on like what you guys thought about O.10. So just a quick, I guess another real thing here is like sometimes when I talk about it and I see people post, they go, O.10 is end of life at the end of this year by the Nodejs. Okay, that's nice. They'll stop supporting it. But I mean, in the end, especially when you have something like Express, like almost like associated with Node itself, like at a fundamental level, like it's just because someone stops supporting a certain version of the runtime doesn't make people stop using it, right? And as a module authors, I mean, in the end, I feel like we're driven to support what people actually use, not whatever, say Node.js is actually supported. I mean, people don't always care. I mean, we shouldn't necessarily draw that line. I mean, it's a nice line to draw, but like, I also do the MySQL module. I literally added O.6 support when I didn't want to because people kept coming and asking for it over and over and over again. So, and I added it back essentially. So, I mean, we can always do that if we make the wrong decision. Always port backwards a version that's not breaking change. But still, just thoughts on that. What you guys think about that? Remember, this is not. We can talk. You can mention Express specifically, but this is more about all of its underlying modules, right? Which will affect more than just Express it affects things like Koa, which obviously isn't going to care. It does higher versions, but just anybody else who might be necessarily using them as well. And yeah, so what are you guys' thoughts on that? Linus, I guess you're unmuted if you have something first.
Yeah, I personally support actually O10 in most of my modules as well, and I think that there's still a lot of people, unfortunately, still using it. So I don't personally see a problem with continue supporting O10 and dropping O8.
Yeah, and like you haven't just have had even, I mean, you say, I certainly support all these different things and I have my own opinions, but like you say you support them too. I mean, is there anything that you think as a module author that nags you to say, I wish I didn't have to do O.10?
I mean, it's basically mostly new ES6 stuff, but then it's you have to go quite high, at least 4 or possibly 6 to get all of the goodness. So mostly I usually use const and let when I write the applications, but libraries stick to var just because O10 support, and it's not that big of a deal, I think.
Yeah, I'm kind of like on the same page. Like, there's a lot of neat kind of syntax. I mean, they add some stuff that's pretty nice, but in the end, at least from a module author's view, like the users don't write that. They just use the module and they can write whatever language they want. But for the module author, it's just like, I feel like it's more of a like prettiness than a really like necessity. For it doesn't actually make it hard. It just makes it say, well, if only I could use ES16 or ES 2016 or 2015, I would love to, but I can't. But it works just fine without it. I think it's like the biggest real difference between continuing supporting O.10 or not. NPM is fairly up to date. Like O.10's NPM does not only the stupid carrots, but it also does org namespaced crap. So out of the box, so really that's like the biggest thing I always find is the tool chain NPM that's included, because most people just always use the bundled version. They don't use anything else. I have encountered systems that actually don't use the bundled version. They use their own system version, which can be annoying. I know a cloud that's sold by a company that we're not on the newest version of it, but a previous version lets you install any node version you want because it will pull it down based on the little semver stuff. But it'll use its included NPM, which was prior to the stupid carrots. Really annoying. But yeah, so cool. What about you, Blake? What do you think as a module author?
I also support Nodejs 10 in most of the things I write, but for the most part, it doesn't affect me, I don't think. I think there's a couple of minor API differences when it comes to like HTTP requests that change like the way the board event emits and stuff like that, just various tiny things. I feel like we could take advantage of like Node 5 to update the ecosystem, because that is probably going to coincide around with like end of life of LTS support for 0.10, and most enterprises should be updating by then. I know that from who I've talked to, are already updating because LTS will be coming to an end, right? That might be a good chance to update, but aside from that, if we don't have too many issues, I mean, most of the time it'll just run anyway.
Yeah, and certainly I think that it's pretty much mostly in agreement that I think Express itself, like in 5, should drop support. Should probably end up as 4.x minimum. As far as all the different modules, certainly anything, if they drop support later, that won't affect Express because it will require 4x anyways. But yeah, so there are certainly shims. So like for your example there, like slight differences, that can help. Perhaps there's potential that we could drop some shims that we currently use. Though almost all of this, from thinking about it, almost all of the shims that that I've done all the time is always because of Node 08. Because O.10 changed a lot. I mean, that was the introduction of streams too. You know, it had a lot of changes in it. A lot of the shims are because of 08. I mean, even set immediate was introduced in O.10. I mean, you know, I ignore all the O9s. I'm not going to say which specific ones, but yeah. So like even like set immediate was there. So like even modules that want to use that got a shim something else in. Super annoying. So yeah. TLS, I think, went under a bunch of change, though that was in O.12. We don't usually directly interact with TLS stuff anyways. I'm just trying to think of just different things I've encountered. I mean, yeah, I mean, from a module author, like I don't usually, at least at this point, encounter too much problem with O.10 anyways. And yeah, so I think definitely dropping O.8 makes sense. And you know, obviously this is just going to be the engines, right? So certain modules may almost do nothing. You know, they're pretty straightforward. So people can certainly use them anyways, regardless of what they say. So I would say if we drop, like, say, a version from Travis, I would say we should probably also drop any shimming that we are doing in it. So say, like, if there's a module that currently does O.8 and it currently shims between set immediate or a fallback if there's no set immediate, if we stop testing on O.8 on Travis, I would probably say we should probably also drop the shim too, because, and the reason why I say that is because what ends up happening, and this happened actually in Express 4.x a long time back, is that people will almost ignore the what it says on there, ignore the engine. So they'll use it anyways, and then later when we do something, because we aren't testing it on O.8 anymore, and so we start using some feature or something that doesn't work or is broken on O.8, they'll say, hey, you made a backwards incompatible change. It's like, well, we were never compatible, it just happened to work. And I think having the shim in there almost like sends a false message that it should work, because people can shim, like, say, set immediate from the outside. They can shim a global. So there are certainly ways they can make it work if they wanted to anyway. So I would say, you know, if when we drop them, that will simplify the code base too, if that makes sense. But yeah, Yapa, do you have any thoughts or no?
I think as long as the version is not holding us back, I'm in favor of supporting them.
Cool. Yeah, that's my biggest thing. In fact, from pretty much, I mean, O.8 itself, just as a module author, I've never really encountered something where I said, I can't make this module because I'm going to support back to O.8 or something. So typically, yeah, it's just the biggest annoyance with it is just, is there anybody really using it? I mean, hopefully not really at this point, because even O.10 is pretty cool, but at the same time, it's like, it's just a pain in the butt to actually run the test against it in Travis to ensure that we're continuing to support it. Because that's the biggest problem, like, especially when you have people who do contributions and things like that. So Blake just wrote in the chat, just for everybody, is that he says the biggest 4.x thing may be documentation, since 4.x introduced promises, which is a good point. So O.12 has promises, and anything higher than that does. So certainly, going higher than that, we'll know that there's a global promises. Personally, I've experimented a few times as a module author with some of the things not in these three orgs that are out there on NPM too, about a dual interface of the module, both promises and callbacks. It's always dubious. Like, there's different ways to do it. I mean, in the end, I always feel like it's error prone because the only way you can't tell if someone's using the return value, so you can pretty much only say, well, if they didn't give me a callback, then I'll assume they're using promises return a promise. Well, they might have done neither by accident, and they'll never know. So that's kind of annoying. That can make debugging hard. So promises, I think in general, is a good concept. It has some little rough edges the way it was implemented, and especially sometimes they can feel a little heavy or whatever. But I think that in general they're a nice abstraction. Certainly will never, because they have so much complexity, and they'll never beat the raw performance of callbacks. But whatever. Of course, internals don't necessarily matter to consumers. They only care about your external API. So it's certainly possible in those modules I've talked about, they'll do dual, and they'll still do dual while still supporting things like O.10. So I've experimented with that too. Modules that do dual interfaces, both promises and callbacks, and still support O.10, and they do that by just saying, if you do callbacks, good, do callbacks. If you do a promise, if you don't give us a callback, and there's no global promise to make a promise from, then we'll die. Otherwise, we'll just do promises. So that not only allows people in O.12 and above to do it, but also anybody who puts like global.promise equals require bluebird and O.10 and lower will be able to use promises as well out of the box kind of thing. So basically, you can think of it as a polyfill. So, yeah, and promise is a whole nother topic, and I've been playing a little bit around with that from a module perspective. So that's the other thing, is that a lot of the stuff we talk about is from sometimes a module's authored perspective, which is different from a user perspective. And because we can there's different concerns that we'll have in the internal workings. But yeah, cool. So unless anybody else has anything to say, feel free to say something in the chat here, and I'll go back. But I'll move on to the last topic here before we run out of the hour, because I don't know if you guys have anything to do, so I don't want to go over as a normal occurrence, is that the centralized org, let's see, I said central generic issue tracking for the orgs. So my thought here is that, all these things have issue trackers. Sure, we could open up issues throughout these different repos and stuff like that, but at the same time, that might not be the most efficient use of our time, or necessarily not. That's not a big concern. My biggest concern is having a good central way to keep track of that. So, like having almost like a board to say, like, almost like a command center is what I kind of maybe picture it as, like saying, like, okay, what are all of our modules, right? What do maybe they could use, like GitHub APIs or something, like say through the shields.io project, to even like say how many open issues are there in this repo, so we can have like an at-glance thing, or say like if we're going through this thing of like, let's turn all of our repos into the standard code format, right? Obviously, there are a bunch where we could just change them, right? They're pretty much almost standard. Change them to standard, fine, right? There are some that are very different from standard. Maybe it's a little harder to change them. Maybe that repo has a bunch of outstanding pull requests and we don't want to disrupt the pull requests, or maybe we have some other reason, right? So it could give us a central way to maybe like say, all right, here are all the ones that are still waiting to be changed to standard. Maybe they have a reason why, or something like that, like a good way to track that kind of a thing. Other things I've kind of struggled with too was, I talked about this earlier, was the lockstep that these things have with their minor releases, so they're all kind of like coordinated together. There's no good central like command to do that. Now, historically, since I've mostly just done it, like, it wasn't that big of a deal, right? I mean, I could just kind of think about it. It still wasn't perfect, right? I forget things, or like things like that. I would either forget that I had pending changes I meant to release as a minor with it and just overlook the module, or other things like that, or forgot to do something, whatever. So it's not perfect. And so the idea was that I'm not expecting us to come to a conclusion here, just to kind of like maybe get some thoughts and and that way we can leave thinking about it. And yeah, so I know Yappa just posted something. If you want to mention it to everybody here.
Yeah, there was this website called waffle.io. It does a good job of aggregating repos from GitHub, and it can be used for managing the issues.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. The first screenshot of it basically looks like almost like a Kanban board.
Yeah, it has that as well. It's just one of the features.
Yeah, that looks pretty cool. I mean, yeah, especially it says it's free. Do you know if it's?
Yeah, it's free, and there would be some paid versions also.
Right. Yeah,
Like
it's actually what's been really cool. It says $0 free forever, unlimited public and private, blah blah blue. Probably because I've always noticed that's actually kind of neat about this whole open source stuff is a lot of services, I think, especially after GitHub showed up, has been giving you for free, especially if you just don't care about having everything public, which we use open source, don't care about having everything public. That's pretty much what we do, right? So if say a thing like waffle.io was like free, but everything has to be public, then it's like, that still counts for us. Everything's public. We don't care if people can see our waffle board or whatever. It's just been pretty cool. So, I mean, this looks like it could be there. Do you know? Yeah. So we'll look at this, and I think I'll probably, because of this too, I'll make it like a little issue in the discussions and you can post in here, or I can post in there, or whatever, and we'll take a look at it. So that sounds like a good idea. So I can see us coming and making a waffle board for it, and we can not only see all the open issues, but yeah, probably tag things out or something.
Right. Yeah. You can tag as well.
Yeah, this could work. Have a nice thing for us to track, because theoretically, say because I'm just spitballing here. What if we still do the lock set minors and all that, right? Maybe we say we could easily flag from our dependent repos this issue is Express 415, right? And then we could easily, it's almost not super meaningful inside that repo, but in a waffle.io board it could be, right? We could do oh, what's all this stuff tagged Express 4.15 through all the repos? And then make sure to knock all of them out or whatever. So that seems pretty cool. And especially, yeah, I don't know. It's pretty cool. Any other thoughts, guys, or whatever? I mean, like I said, we don't have to come up with a solution right now, just to kind of think a little bit here and also talk about it, because one of the things that I mentioned before is we have this meeting and we post it publicly is because people might watch this and they have their own thoughts on it, and we will have the discussion issues open that they can certainly post. They don't even have to be on the TC to propose anything or their thoughts, because we're not, the idea of it is that the TC will rectify any problems or make any, say, decision. If a decision has to be made, it's not being unanimously figured out just by itself. But otherwise, anybody in the community can propose ideas or help with whatever. So, yeah, waffle.io looks kind of cool. So yeah. Sorry, I just got knocked out. My Chrome tab said all snap on me, even though I was just not doing anything. So, all right, I'm back. I didn't miss anything, I'm sure. So yeah, any thoughts you guys have, or if you don't have thoughts, anything else you guys want to bring up here before we adjourn, or anything that maybe you had on your mind you wanted to talk about. Like I said, we don't have to come to resolutions here, but just bring it up, and we can always then make the discussion as an artifact to follow up on and things like that. So, Blake and Linus.
Someone on Gitter channel asked how the users can help the TC.
How the users can help the TC.
Yeah.
So, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like basically they're asking, how do I get started contributing, kind of thing. Is that sound like what they were asking, or something different?
Yeah, I think it can be understood as contribution in varying degrees, maybe not just in code, but in whichever other ways.
Yep, and that was actually somewhat plays into the previous thing, like potentially that Waffle.io thing too, right? Like, because of the fact that we have a bunch of repos, right? I think a lot of that could be like, well, what if we have a central place where people could see like what issues are there, and maybe they can jump in easier. Or I know that some of that can come into play, like, you know, maybe we just need to just sit down and like write up a little kind of like intro thing, maybe on like the I think there's the page on the website, I think under resources or whatever, basically whatever we want where that community section would be, like say, hey, are you interested in answering questions? Do this or whatever. And like, I know we probably need to take a look at making, like, having people watch some tag in Stack Overflow. I've never really done Stack Overflow stuff, but you know, that could be other things too, because I'm sure there's lots of questions on there. You know, like there are lots of times where a lot of these modules could use a lot of improvements to their documentation, but like, there's no good way to do that, right? I mean, we could of course just always have an issue that's always sitting open, like improve documentation on every single repo, and we never close it, you know. So, but I think that, you know, just stating that out can help with that kind of a stuff, you know, and that's why I was like thinking about Waffle.io and things like that. So, it's a good question. I don't 100% know a good answer just because I'm not super familiar with it. You know, I'll probably post this as a discussion issue or an issue on the discussions too, just to pass around and get any ideas. But that's my thoughts on it, if that makes sense.
Yep, sounds good. And yeah, my immediate answer to that guy was that you can give us feedbacks, suggest stuff, and if you can, contribute to the code.
Yeah, and I know this is another thing that we should probably put on there too, and I've told people this, so some people have asked me because, you know, when they know that I do the open source whatever, they ask, how can I get started and things like that. You know, it's a really hard question to answer, of course, like, because it's hard to just get started because you feel like getting started. If you don't know what to do, it's almost like, well, then what's the purpose? You know what I mean? One thing I have suggested to people sometimes is, you know, in a lot of projects, thing on my own, right? Maybe you can always start with contributing test cases, right? Are you using the module and doing something that you don't think there's a test for? Maybe start adding the test for that. Not only does it start to get you kind of like not only there but also noticed by the people, but also it's almost like self-serving, right? Like, hey, now hopefully they shouldn't break my use case because there's a test for it to show them when they break me. So like it kind of like has like a dual purpose because, you know, in the end I think a lot of the contributing is, you know, in somewhat of a self-interest. Either they really like to do it, they are using the module themselves and just want to see it do whatever. They want to get experience in doing open source or whatever, or just have their name over some stuff. I don't know. But yeah, so Yeah, so a lot of that, like I said, some of this stuff we can easily just put on some kind of like tips section or whatever, I don't know. That way we can point people out when they have the question, and of course, if they have any other, then they have to come up with questions that are answered on there. We can certainly work on answering those too. But it's kind of like almost like having a kind of canned answer somewhere at least, because it certainly is a good question and a good thing that I think people will have, because like I said, I still encounter a lot of people that just, they hear Node, they think Express, and it's just because of Hello Worlds. A lot of people, they start on server-side development, at least that I encounter, so there's a lot of people who will come to Express just because they're not really sure where else to start, and they'd say, I want to help. You know, it's the same reason why a lot of people go to Node Core and contribute random stuff on there, because they say, oh, Node, I'm using it, you know, let's try to do that, you know, and they don't have anything in particular, and they're not really interested in maybe like being an author of a module, you know, maybe they've never done it before, or, you know, not sure where to get started on that, so that's like a foot in the door kind of thing, so yeah. And I know I haven't really said that here because I'm still not sure how I feel. I mean, when I'm at work, there'll be people who may say, I'm not sure what to do, and things like that. And I'm like, there are literally a million things. There's infinite work to do here. I'm not 100% sure if that is directly applicable here, just because like there's more than just change for the sake of change here as well, because I mean it's not as malleable, right? Private code base you can literally change all day long, breaking constantly, you know, breaking changes. Well, it's not the same exactly from a module perspective, so it's a little more nuanced answer, I think, being modules than being like your own private stuff, which you can just endlessly refactor over and over again. And I think that because of most people who are doing professional work are more familiar with the privateness of code and being able to do anything at any time, also I think that can be a little bit of a struggle for starting with open source stuff, especially module stuff, when like there are contracts and we don't want to break everybody, but we do want change, but it has to be, you know, particular kind of change or who knows what. So I think it's certainly a valid question. I think we can kind of work to answer, so I'll make a discussion issue on this so we can chat about it or think of some things, and maybe the answer is just let's just get some like starter list and put it on the website or something. Who knows? So yeah, that's all my thoughts I really have on it.
Right. Sounds great.
I think waffle.io is what killed my stupid Chrome. Yeah, any other things you guys, thoughts that you guys have or whatever? Otherwise, I think we'll probably...
And a quick one, there was another guy, he was asking if generator async await would be supported in Express.
So, trying to think here. So when you said the word generator, you weren't talking about the Express generator. You were talking about
no.
generators.
Yeah, generators. Yeah.
Like at the language level, so functions that yield.
Right. Yeah.
You know, so technically technically middleware, and even the router itself, if you look at the router module, is just a function that just takes a req-res and next, and so technically anybody can make a router themselves and do whatever they want. It's not as straightforward to inject your own global router into Express as in like change like what app.get goes to and app.put and all those convenience functions. You know, maybe that will be improved with Express 5, but I think the question sounds to me like more of like a little bit geared towards the default router. Right? When will the default router do this? So the answer to generators is never. We won't do the generators. One, because generators were not meant to do that. Generators just generate a list of things. People did hack it by using generators to generate a list, essentially a list of functions that would bounce off of a trampoline. So if you're used to Koa, which did generators for a while, you essentially it's actually generating functions, and Co, which is what underlies it, is a trampoline system that will bounce those functions, that will then call that function as return. So that's really a hack basically until we had things like async and await. So as for async and await specifically, under the hood, all those do is return a promise. They're sugar for a promise. So that, to me, that really means when will Express do promises? Because if it does promises, async and await is basically a given. It just does it by promises. So the answer is hopefully Express 5. There's a little bit more nuance there. I know we've talked a little bit about like how, what happens when the promise is reject, pretty straightforward. What happens when it's resolved, a little more nuanced. And that has to do with the fact of Express's API, which is built on callbacks, and you're writing to there. A lot of that could be addressed if we change the API potentially. Like, if you think about it, like, say, like, I've used things like, say, NancyFX, which is a Sinatra-inspired framework like Express, but in the C# language. So what they do is you return response objects, and the response object has you populate it with crap, and the body you actually put as a lambda, which when it's called it will essentially write to a stream, so that way you can still have streaming responses out there. I mean, if we accepted things like that, then that could be an answer to what would happen when a promise resolves, right? You resolve it with a response object, for example, and then we send that. But those are all certainly open questions. There are ways to hack it in there where, say, like, when it's resolved, you just ignore the resolution, right, and just be like, if it rejects, forward the error. If it resolves, just don't do anything. So I think that, and I think there was some discussion recently. I know Blake probably has some ideas on this, but yeah, to me, that's what as far as the specific question, that's pretty much what it is for me. Generators, not going to do that. That was a hack as a carryover. Async await, all that is if you understand like what it's doing under the hood, it's technically an async function. It's just returning a promise from that function implicitly, and so that's effectively at that point it's back to when would we take handlers that return a promise and actually do something with it being rejected and resolved. And not just doing something, but we actually have to like usually then it, so we actually like make it complete and do something with it. So yeah, and the answer for that would be that there is some thought going into it, probably not till Express 5, and the exact details of how it would work I think is still not completely fleshed out. And whatever, so I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Cool. Any other things anybody else wants to bring up or that you saw in the Gitter channel? It sounds like Gitter's pretty useful, guys. Anybody listening? We're sitting here talking about stuff that was talked about in Gitter, and as you see, just talking about shit in Gitter can make us talk about it here. So
Yeah.
lots of ways to influence Express, even if it's not direct, Cool. Well, if anybody doesn't have anything else too much, it's been 1 hour 45 minutes. We started 5 minutes later, so it's 1 hour 40. And yeah, if you don't have anything else, I guess we'll probably end the meeting here. Express 4.14, look for it on your local NPM mirror sometime tomorrow. And happy upgrading's there. Report, people certainly report any issues you have with it. It, is meant to be fully backwards compatible. Obviously, any change is still a change, but, we strive to hopefully make it as compatible as we can. So, always feel free to report issues or troubles you're having, even if you're, you can certainly report it, and maybe we'll say, no, that's how it's supposed to be, right? I mean, it can't really hurt. Maybe we didn't mean that, and if you just, maybe you just accepted that that's the way it is, and, there was a time, I bring that up just for anybody listening, because there was an Express release where I broke something a long time ago, and it literally, I didn't realize it was broken until someone reported it, I think, several minors later, and it was like probably a year after that release, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't think I can really, I'm not sure. Like at that point, it's like, should I fix this or not fix this? It's like, at that point, it becomes a real big question. So, it's nice to hear about things. I have canaries in production that I've actually been running this tentative 4.14 on, and they seem to be working fine. So, hopefully, there isn't any glaring regression on it. So, cool. All right. Well, I think that wraps up the June 15th meeting. I think that we will go ahead and have the next one on the 29th, unless we think that we need it on the 22nd, but I think we'll just go on the 29th unless we think otherwise, and see you guys then in the TC meeting.